Welcome to Becoming Church, the podcast where we discuss how the message and movement of Jesus is not just about becoming Christians, but about becoming the church. I'm your host, Kristen Mockler-Young, and I'm so glad you are joining the conversation. Welcome back to Becoming Church podcast. We're glad that you're here today, friends. I am here with another pastor, another internet pastor, which is we're going to talk about. My friend, Ian Simkins. Ian, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor.
Yes. Did you know that internet pastor was a title that you would?
I think that's the first time I've heard it. Although I have gotten messages from people over the years, like, thanks for being my internet pastor. I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I think it's endearing.
Yes, I think surely. I'm guessing they mean it in the best way, right?
Hope so.
All right, we're going to dig into that more, but your official title is you are the lead pastor. Is that right?
Yes,
At
ma'am.
the Bridge outside of Nashville?
That's right.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your church.
Yeah, we just started here about a year and a half ago, and
okay.
It's been a real joy. The story of how we even got down here is a whole other saga. But in that transition, though, we've actually restructured some things. So at the Bridge, there are two lead pastors. So I'm the lead pastor of teaching, and then Craig is our lead pastor of strategy. And that is it's been an absolutely wonderful shift in our approach to how we organize. And it requires a lot of trust. But it's kind of he and I recognizing here's something that you're good at that I'm not good at, and vice versa. And it's been great. So the Bridge is, been here in south of Nashville for almost 20 years, and just an incredible culture, incredible team. We've never lived in the South before, so I feel like we're learning them and they're learning us, but they've just been so gracious, and we're having a blast.
That's awesome. Yeah, you and I are both from the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
We were just chatting about a little bit beforehand. How is Nashville compared to what you're used to? Michigan, Illinois, all of that.
There are certainly some similarities. It's most metropolitan areas, the further away from the city center you get, the more you see shifts. So we moved down in March 2021, and the COVID culture in Illinois was much different than it was in Tennessee. And that certainly was a shift internally in a number of different ways. I think part of what I've really appreciated down here, there seems to be a real ecumenical sense of hey, the Big C church, we're on the same team.
Oh, I love that.
I spent the first 6 months just having lunch and coffees with local pastors, and it was just
so
receptive, and so not that that's not the case in Chicago, but there's a different level of the Southern hospitality thing is for real. But it is also, when you're new somewhere, especially when your role includes speaking, you're learning the landmines as you step on them. So who you can and can't quote, or references that do and don't make sense, or I'm learning those by checking my inbox on Monday morning. That might have been too far. Okay, got it. So that's some of what because I was born and raised in Detroit and then been in Chicago the last 20 years. That's all I'd really ever known. So it's a lot more nuanced difference, but they love their hot chicken, love their sweet tea. And I'm growing to love it, but it's, it feels really similar in some ways and then drastically different in others.
Yeah. I've not yet been to Nashville, but I want to come. I got to come at some point.
It really is a ton of fun.
That's awesome. Charlotte is where we are. It's I consider it a small, big city. It definitely has the big city vibe.
Yes.
But on a much, much smaller scale than Chicago or New York City.
Well, in Tennessee in particular, there's so many transplants. There are very, very few people who are actually from here.
Okay.
Which I think is a tremendous opportunity for the church, because everyone's longing for connection, community. And you walk through our parking lot on a Sunday, and there's more out-of-state license plates than there are Tennessee ones. It's a really people have been jumping ship on Michigan and Illinois for a while.
Yeah.
I've never lived anywhere where so many people are trying to get in, which is that's a trip.
Okay, now I want to know, Charlotte is very transient. So this is something that has affected our church, because not only are people moving to Charlotte, but they're also using it as a jumping board to another place. Are you seeing the same thing? We have a revolving door of people, it seems.
I don't think I'm seeing that nearly as now. I am still only a year and a half in, but I see a
Yeah.
lot of young families moving here, and then a lot of grandparents following suit, like packing up their
Okay.
lives. So it feels like, if I'm being optimistic, there's a real like kind of rootedness.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, like cost of living stuff is going through the roof. That used to be like a real appeal down here, and
Okay.
that's quickly going away. The horror stories of people who put in 40 different offers and got rejected for all of them, like that's causing, I think,
Sure.
legitimate stress for people. But it seems like people are moving, and they're bringing their extended families with them,
Yeah.
which is again a really unique opportunity, I think.
Yeah. That's cool. That is definitely a different, I hate to use the word audience, but
Mhm.
you're going after a different people group where we've got a lot of young singles, a lot of 20 somethings, even 30 somethings that are
Mhm.
like, I'm here until I find a job or the family or the place I want to settle.
Interesting. That
Yeah.
would have to, affect your strategy pretty drastically.
Oh, for sure. Talk to me about, you said you've had a lot of support from the other pastors and other churches in your area. Now, do they all work together? I mean,
Mm,
ideally, right? The Big C church, we all work together. But what does
yeah.
that practically look like for you guys?
Yeah. So there's a couple of guys here. I mean, I just knew, being the new guy, it would be foolish not to learn from the people who have been here, some of them 15, 20 years in the trenches doing the work, seeing
Right.
the landscape change. So it was more than just like recon, but a lot of them have organized monthly lunches or breakfast, or helped me even meet local governmental leaders. Like there's just a
That's
real
awesome.
like, oh, you should meet the mayor will be here next time, or you should meet the like stuff that would have taken me a while to figure out where these people are or who I should connect with. They've like preempted
That's
and
awesome.
made introductions. And there's a couple of different orbits too. So that, we have like our Spring Hill, Columbia, and then there's like the greater Nashville, and there's just consistent gatherings meant to pour into pastors or pastors and their spouses. We have just like a ton of like unity events. There are people that are like writing collaboratively.
I love
A
it.
lot of us are facing, if you're trying to go multi-site, or you have gone multi-site, and other churches are considering it, like helping people write their playbooks. And here's what we've
Cool.
learned. And here's that. It feels like no one's real close to the chest, like with their trade secrets. It's like, oh, we did what you guys were trying to do 5 years ago, learn from our
Let us help
mistakes.
you.
And that's been a joy to kind of be a part of those conversations.
That's awesome. I really love when I see churches together, like churches and church bodies and communities doing things, outwardly in the community. But I love even more when I see pastors doing it, because generally it's not happening out in the public. It is, like you said, at coffees or breakfasts or meetings and networking events. And that just like, oh, I have such a heart for the church. And so to
Mhm.
see that happening, like that to me is like, not that it's not genuine when churches get together, but when
Mhm.
pastors are doing it behind the scenes, is just
Yes.
like so tender, you
Well,
know?
and the benefit that I couldn't have even necessarily foreseen, as I'm sure you can imagine, they were without a lead guy for 2 years at the bridge,
Oh, wow.
and they hire me, and I knew this was going to be a part of the equation. For some people, I'm just not going to be their cup of tea,
Yeah.
like I'm not even my own cup of tea sometimes. I totally, but part of what's been beautiful having these conversations is, there's been families that have told me like, hey, nothing personal. We just don't know that, you're our vibe or whatever. We're thinking of going over here. And I'm like, oh, Pastor Mark, I just had coffee with him you're going to
Love
love it
that.
there.
Yep.
And the kids programming is off the charts. Like the surprise on people's faces, like, oh yeah, we're all on the same team. Like
We're not competing.
I'm sad to see you go, but I actually care about you getting
Yes.
connected and invested in an environment that feels like is for your family's flourishing, and to stay with confidence. Yeah, I know those guys. That'll be awesome. You'll love them. Tell them I
Yeah.
said hi. Like that to me is like the ecumenical John 17, like unity of the church. I think there's
Right.
a missional component too. I think the people that are skeptical of church and religion and faith, when they see pastors and leaders, willingly carve out time to
Yeah.
love on each other, at the very least, I feel like that sends a message like, hey, yeah, we're not in competition. This isn't,
Yeah.
no one here is getting paid, on commission or something.
Right.
Like,
Right. Right. Yeah. I texted a lady that I hadn't seen from church recently, and she was like, oh, this is whatever. She's like, we're thinking about going here. And I said, go there. I know the pastor. He's a friend of mine. You'll love it. And she texted me after and she was like, well, you're right. He's a hugger like you are. I was like, that's perfect. I was like, I'm going to miss her. And then I told her, I was like, listen, if you still want to come to our women's events, come. If you still want to come to our like social stuff, come. Like, it's totally, you can bop around, you know?
Yes. There's a meme I saw somewhere. It's like, hey, you could leave our church and we can still be friends. We're not in a gang. Like, it's not, it doesn't have to become a blood feud. And I think that sometimes, I don't know where that came from, but this idea that, man, if we are attending different churches, we can never see you again.
Yeah.
Like,
because it does happen. It does happen a lot.
For sure.
And I think a lot of it is born out of pain. I think for sometimes both for pastors or for people who decide to go to another church, or like, it's just easier. Yeah. Not even that something traumatic happened, but it's easier to just like cut and run and start over.
Yes.
You know,
I totally get it. It is not lost on me that as a like vocational minister, that's a different, I've only ever worked at churches my entire adult life. So I don't even know, the whole church shopping experience sounds terrible. Like necessary, but the whole, you get in the car afterwards and, you know, maybe you're married, maybe you have kids and you're like, we like this, but we didn't love this. That was weird. Did you hear him say this? That song, what was it? You know, it almost, and I know that we could probably talk global church versus Western church and how,
yes, sure.
Here, but like, I have never had to do that.
Yeah.
So I feel like in a way, it's almost made me more compassionate to the person that's like, we started attending this church when it was this, and now it's a little more this, and we don't know that we like that. I'm like, I completely understand. Like, that's
right.
I don't know that I wouldn't do something different. I think there's something worth pushing through discomfort. I think there's a sanctifying component to that. I'm certainly not one of those people. Like, I remember the first time hearing the phrase sheep stealer. I was like,
no.
Did your congregants know that you talk about them like that?
Oh, like, I've never heard that.
If the church down the road has an event cooler than ours and someone attends, now you're a sheep stealer. And I was like, oh my gosh. Don't we have better things to do with our time than to be, I don't know, lobbing insults like that back and forth with each other.
Right. Well, and okay, that, like, even just the whole idea of that, the implication to me is like, okay, now we have this locked in pen. Yes. And so if we're stealing sheep, then that means we are already closed off and we are already a clique. And that's already a problem, because guess what? If nobody can come out, then nobody new can come in either.
It's all scarcity mindset too.
Yes.
Right? It's not abundance mindset at all.
And it's not kingdom mindset either.
Totally. 100%. Right? You're speaking my language.
Awesome. I love it. Well, I found you on Instagram probably because somebody that I follow shared your words. It might've been Aaron Moon. I don't exactly remember. And I saw you repeatedly and I was like, okay, I got to follow this guy. Has anybody ever told you that you remind them of like Rich Viotis? Have you ever heard that?
No, but I appreciate that.
I was trying to figure out, I'm like, what's the best way for me to explain Ian's posts to people that don't yet follow you? And if you're listening and you don't, you need to, because your posts are always like very poignant and they make me think, but they're also very heartfelt and you can tell, but they're also like, I am not short with the words. So I'm like, how do you say things so clearly, but so succinctly? And I would need like a full page podcast to like, or a blog post to explain this.
Well, I mean, first off, that is incredibly kind. Thank you. I don't take that lightly at all. I kind of can't believe that any of that resonates with anyone, to be honest. And that's a lot of that's, Enneagram 3, imposter syndrome stuff. I'm a 3 too. As soon as you said it, that's embedded somewhere deep in my psyche. But there's probably a couple of things I would say. And the first that comes to mind, I had a mentor in college who he made a comment about preaching that has always stuck with me. He said, until you can describe an upcoming sermon in one sentence to an 8-year-old, you're not done writing it. And for him, it was all about, because he would quiz us. Hey, what's your sermon about this Sunday? And I would go on this whole rabbit trail. Like I was, on CSI with like red yarn connected to this. And he's like, you don't actually know what it's about, do you? And I'm like, no idea, no clue.
You're like,
So
but
like
there's
that,
so many good stories and
right,
facts.
exactly. And editing, like chopping, is to this day still one of my biggest weaknesses in writing. I just want to
Yeah.
say all the things, and like, yeah, but you have a
Yes.
half hour, so
Right.
don't do that. And no one, you can tell them next week, so like
Yeah.
the discipline of how do you distill something down, not just short, by the way, but so that like a child could like
Yeah.
understand what you're saying. That challenge has been like slowly over 20 years, kind of, that's been a formational guide that I keep kind of going back to. And with Instagram, I mean, it's a pretty uneventful story. Like, I did it on accident. Like, people have asked me like, okay, could I steal your aesthetic? I'm like, it's just Apple Notes. Like, I just screenshot.
It's literally a black square.
That's all it is.
Right.
Like, I don't think I can take any ownership of any of that. It was like, what's the easiest way for me to write something and then post it online? So sometimes it's like, on the front end, they're just thoughts that I'm thinking about for a future sermon. As I'm trying to, it almost becomes like a laboratory, like, oh, let's see if this idea, this notion, this sticky statement, whatever, resonates. And a lot of times it doesn't. And that's helpful to know before you preach. And then sometimes it's after a sermon where in a room something did resonate that you didn't anticipate would resonate. You're like, oh man, that you felt the room shift when I said this, and that wasn't even like highlighted in my notes,
hadn't even
maybe not in my
unpacked
notes at all. So it has a sort of pre and post relationship with the writing that I do in my role as a pastor. And then sometimes it's, to try to give language to something happening in culture or the world. Sometimes even just my world, with being a new dad, the sleeplessness that we're experiencing and just thinking about God's heart as father, you know what I mean? Like it's just sort of all over the place. People think I have like this really strategic, streamlined like sense and a spreadsheet of what I'm going to post. I'm like, it's kind of what I'm thinking about that day.
Yeah. That's awesome. I know, because that was one of my questions as someone who also is a parent, is writing sermons, writing other content, like trying to teach. I also am the worst at editing. I swear the
worst. I hate it.
I write so much content and then it's painful deleting paragraphs and deleting.
Yes.
But I was going to say, how do you have the time? You've got a brand new baby. You're not sleeping. Maybe that's when you're doing it. Is that when you're writing your content?
It's amazing the work you can get done when you just cut out 7 hours of sleep every day. Just don't do it. It's not, the thing that's fun about it is like, it's not a part of my role, and there's no expectation that I do or don't post X amount of times per week. So it's sort of, it gets just to be a fun passion project. I like the challenge of it. I do like that, like is there a way that I can distill this idea down? And a lot of times, like, there are dozens upon dozens of drafts in my phone that will never see the light of day because they're dumb. Like it's an analogy I thought was really clever, and I'll go back to it. Like, I found one the other day, and the starting point was, you don't need a car to drive the point home. And I'm like, what is that? Like, at some point in my life, I thought that was clever, and I just keep it there. So I will read stuff and tool with it a little bit, and then decide to post it or leave it. So I don't feel the weight of expectation. Like, oh man, I got to carve out X amount of hours every single day because that Instagram post is coming. It's sort of, it's taught me to have my eyes more open to like life as it's happening, which I think is a helpful thing in sermon writing. Like I'm researching sermons more than when I'm just sitting at a computer or reading a book. Like, I should be paying attention to something my kids said at dinner or something that happened, in the hallway at work. Like, I think the best communicators kind of have their radars up all the time, just to kind of take these things in. And it's fun to kind of capture those things and say, hey, maybe later this week, I'll play with some of that wording and see if it's helpful. And, half the time it's not, and it just doesn't go anywhere.
Well, I think it makes you a good communicator. It also makes you a good pastor, because in order to, like, I said, one of my favorite things is like finding Jesus in weird places or like unexpected places. And so it's that same idea where, I could look up Bible verses, and I could find scriptures, and I could read theology books, and I could, all the things, but I need to know the need of the people that I'm shepherding. I need to know what's going on, yes, in the world, but also like in our city and in our community? What's the felt need there? And so, yeah, when you know your people and you can speak right exactly to what they're facing or going through.
That's right.
I mean, God is just going to like blow their minds.
Right. Well, and I think that preaching too needs to like the text needs to preach to us before we ever preach it to anybody else. And I always want that to be an overflow of here's what I'm learning, or here's what I feel that the Lord's teaching us, or here's what I'm wrestling with, or like I try to be very, very intentional about articulating, like I'm not coming from a place of expertise here. Here's what I'm in the midst of. Here's what I feel like the Lord has for us as a community right now. And learning that voice, I had a mentor post college I wanted him to come there for my first sermon ever.
No.
And I was so excited. I had been preparing it for months, and he just sort of sat in the back as people left. And he said, are you listening to a lot of this guy, and this guy? And of course, those are the three. I couldn't believe it. It was like,
oh no.
I was like, yes, why? And he said, because that's all I could hear up there.
Oh, yeah.
And then he said, if you don't believe that God has given you a voice for these people at this place and time, you have no business preaching. And it was heavy, but it like really stuck with me though.
Yeah,
like,
I bet.
You're spending too much time trying to emulate and copy and paste these other people that you think are crushing it. Like you have a set of eyes, you have a lived experience, you're where you're at for a very specific purpose.
Yeah.
And don't usurp that by trying to, land sound bites or mic drops. Like that's not what faithful preaching and pastoring is all about,
That's awesome. That's been one of my, I guess, flags to fly, or one of my big things, being a female pastor, a female communicator in the South, like at my church, obviously it's fine. I do it all the time. Right. But there have been other churches that, like, if our lead pastor couldn't go and speak, he'd be like, hey, but I have another pastor, whatever. And they're like, nope, we're good.
No.
And so just having to lean into that, like, God did give me a voice and it was female. And also, as much as I like want to put Beth Moore like on a pedestal, I'm also not Beth Moore.
Right.
And so God's going to reach 1.5 zillion people through her. And then hopefully through my voice, he'll reach a different audience or different people.
Totally. And I think you're right. Like what you're getting at, gosh, I'm so grateful you shared that. Cause I had to come face to face too early on, how much of my preaching, how much woven into my preaching was me just trying to impress people.
Yeah.
Like that's probably why I hated editing so much, because I had to really confront, does the Greek etymology of this word actually help the sermon? Or do you just want people to know that you know Greek?
And think that you're
having
smart.
to answer that question was like, oh, that was painful. You're like, I just want them to know that I know Greek. Like, that's not what servant leadership is. That's about you. And that you need to cut that out. And that's been a process,
Yes.
And weeding that out. But
yes, it will be. Yeah. My prayer always right before I walk out is like, God, push me out of the way. Like push me out of the way. Just your message, my voice, but it's your message. Just get me out of the way.
I love it. So good.
So, all right. So there is a whole idea. Have you read the book Meta Church by Dave Adamson yet?
I haven't yet. It's in my heart. I've heard so many people reference it. I need to.
I've got him coming on the podcast also in a couple episodes, because that book just totally rocked my world. But he basically, there's this idea and he writes about this, but other people are talking about this too. But the idea that, like, he said the front door of the church is basically now in somebody's pocket. But like, thanks to our phones, their first experience with church or with a ministry is now digital. And that it may or may not ever finish like in a physical location.
Right.
And I feel like, as somebody who is an internet pastor, as I dubbed you, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh gosh, that is a bag of worms. I'm definitely not one of those pastors that thinks all social media, all technology is evil at all. Obviously, like I've seen it used for good in ways that way beyond my expectations, to be honest. One of the things that people will ask is, is technology good or bad? And I'll say it's not good or bad, but it's not neutral. Like it is forming us in some way, shape, or form. When people talk about this, is sort of a hobby horse of mine. Like formation is not a Christian thing; it's a human thing. We're all being formed by someone or something. The question is, do we know what that is? And I think when it comes to how we utilize or leverage technology, I think there needs to be, I hope that we'll continue to have more and more conversations about not just how it's used, but how is it forming us. My hope is in the next 15 years, we're going to hear a lot more of that in the church world. It's not just, it's more than just a MailChimp text alert type of device.
Sure.
If our people are reaching for our phone first thing in the morning, that's a formation device. And there's something is happening, we know, in our biochemistry, our neurology is being shaped by it. But I think it is pretty fascinating, obviously, especially with COVID, and like learning how to utilize strategically, but also being aware of pretty early on, like I didn't go into ministry to become a content creator. Yeah. And that was starting to like wear on me a bit, filming these videos in my basement. I'm like, this is,
oh my gosh,
I was so bad at it and so clunky, and some people excelled at it, but it also created this very weird division too. There's, huge churches already had a media team and a media budget and a platform. And then you had other churches that were just putting iPhones on music stands. And I thought that was a whole interesting discussion. But I think that it was interesting. Carrie Newhoff and Michael Frost, for a while, were kind of going back and forth online. Carrie saying, this is the greatest opportunity the church has ever had. And Frost is saying, this is going to set the church back 25 years.
Okay.
And I found myself kind of oscillating between both of them, I think, making good points, and wanting to say, can I just say both? Yeah, I think it both is an incredible opportunity and presents some very real challenges, mainly in sort of our consumeristic posture towards faith and church.
Yeah.
That's not to say that, some of those tendencies weren't already there. I feel like this exacerbated some of them. But that there's a man here named Jason Thacker. He goes to our church, and he just wrote a brilliant book called Following Jesus in the Digital Age. And it is he would be a killer guest, by the way, if you're interested.
Awesome.
It is such a helpful theological framework about what it is that we're talking about. How can we be faithful Christ followers, knowing that this digital landscape is not going away?
Yeah.
I remember I had a friend of mine who he walked away from the church years ago. He made the comment, he said, you Christians treat online like it's Vegas. Like what happens here stays here, like you'll say things online that I know you would never say to each other on a Sunday. And I think he saw this discrepancy between,
like, more in like the comment section type, right? Or like a Twitter, not like post. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Maybe, who knows who he was following.
True.
and I think that incongruity, a lot of people, maybe onlookers, find it is a front door for them to our church, but it's also a front door to our lives and what we choose to celebrate or rail against, or with the political climate and racial reckoning. And I feel like everyone's had an opportunity to kind of dive deeper into our own lives than maybe we've ever had the opportunity to, which is both an opportunity and also, I think, presents some real challenges.
Yeah, we have to definitely sit with what we post before we should sit with the things that we're going to say before we say them, where they're going to live forever.
And I think it's also true, like, that comments are not the same as conversation. And I think we know that.
For sure.
But so much of what is lost in the nuance of like seeing someone's facial expression after I say something mean, something in my brain says, I don't like I hurt her. I shouldn't have, we're losing some of that, I think, if the predominant engagement that we have is digital. And I think I worry a little that we're, like, in some ways losing our capacity to truly sit with one another
and engage
in grief or discomfort or confusion. Like, those things require a presence that I think is hard to maintain if, like you said, the world is in our pocket.
Well, I think that's why too I so much want to celebrate and highlight people that I think are using the internet the right way. That's why I was like, I've got to have you on. I want more people to know you, not because I need them to know you, but because I want them to see the way you are using the internet, the way you are using social media for ministry, because you truly are. Like, there had to have been some thought in the back of your mind when you started this of a purpose.
Yeah. I think, first off, thank you. That's so kind. I think I was getting tired of the noise
Yeah.
I was feeling it, like I'm just as susceptible to doom scrolling. I don't know if you had that moment where like you're scrolling for no reason, like a zombie, and then you snap out of it and you're like, how long have I been doing what I have work to do? And I think it wasn't any one particular catalytic moment. But I was feeling the weight of it. And I remember thinking like, man, if I'm feeling weighed down by all this, I bet you other people are. Yeah. If I could even just for a millisecond break through the noise for one person to give, I don't know, a moniker of hope or encouragement, or sometimes challenge. Like sometimes what I post is not, all butterflies and rainbows. It can, a challenge in how we think about our political lives or our money or whatever. That was my hope. It felt like there was these predictable back and forths, this kind of binary thinking that I feel like Jesus is often kind of going after, particularly in the Sermon on the Mount. Like, you think it's this or this, it's actually this. Like, how do we think with like a kingdom imagination about these platforms and these resources that we have? And it doesn't, it certainly comes with its fair amount of ridicule. I got a number of people that seem to just want to troll. I could just say, Jesus loves you. People are like, well, technically not, because of this, like, it doesn't matter. And I think 22-year-old Ian would have gotten really beat up by that. 39-year-old Ian still doesn't love it, but I've developed a little bit of thickness of skin. You're like, all right, well, Lord bless. Thanks for the comment. That's
right.
But that is part of it, though. And I was lying to say, like, oh man, it's just been nothing but uplifting, encouraging Caleb. It is it's got its dark days, and sometimes you throw something out in the ether or the internet and you think, is that even good? Should I be sharing that with anybody? Which that's a whole other trip to even process. Like, I don't even know. I've gone back on things that I posted even just a year or two ago and thought, I think I shifted a bit on that.
I think that is such a fascinating thing that I've thought about before too. I'm like, there are things. I have not written a book, but I have talked to we're going to put that other. But I have talked to other author friends who have said basically, I don't even agree with what I said 10 years ago. And it's in a book and a zillion people have read it. And like, now I don't think that's true anymore.
Yes. Same with preaching. The amount of times I've gone back and apologized to people who were a part of, the very first church I preached at and said, I am so sorry you had to sit through 5 years of that. Like, I went back and listened to the audio and it's a miracle that you're still taking my phone calls. Like there's, I think we'll always feel that, and I think that is the weird dance between cancel culture versus consequences, which I don't think they're the same thing. Some people are like, we're trying to get canceled. You're like, that's just consequences for saying it or doing a dumb thing.
Correct.
But I wonder if we're losing some of our capacity to celebrate when someone changes their mind when presented with new information. Like, you're flip-flopping. Like, no, I read 6 more books from when and I know things now that I didn't. So now I preach different, or I write different, or I parent different,
or I believe differently.
Of course. And that can be really frightening to certain people. For good reason. I understand. Like, sometimes the safety of like an airtight, vacuum sealed faith can feel very appealing.
Right.
But I don't know that vacuum sealed was ever supposed to be the goal.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the lost arts of people too. Like we were talking about people engaging and interacting in real life, is that ability to see transformation.
Yep.
So where it would be very scary to have a book out there that I don't any longer believe in, or like you said, to have messages out there, content out there that you don't believe in anymore. But I don't think it's all bad if we can get to the place where we allow people to change. Sure. We can celebrate growth, changing your mind, like,
of course,
reimagining things.
I think with under the banner of technology and how we do or don't use it, like, I think we see that in scripture. I think it's John, there's a verse where he says something like, I have so much more to write you, but it actually would be better for me to share in person. And then you see the flip of that, like, I was just with you, but actually this one might be better in writing. They're using the technology of their time and they're discerning, like, would this be good as an email or an
Right.
instant email, or would this be better for me just to sit with you like on your porch? And the ability to discern those things, I think that's going to become a very, very valuable skill, to know the difference. Like this is worth platforming, this is worth articulating this way, and this one that doesn't need to live on Instagram. That just needs to be a conversation between you and your family or whatever,
Yeah. That's brilliant. I love you said they were using the technology of their time. I mean, it's true.
Yeah, right.
They maybe had two options: out of the mouth or on a letter.
That's right.
Still, those were their options. They had to decide.
Well, and any technological advancement has always had formational and communal implications. You think about music, historically, if you wanted to hear music, you need to be near a musician. You need to be physically near someone playing guitar. And then they invented the phonograph. So now music could be centered on the world, but you still need to be, near the device.
Right.
And you would all kind of gather together. Now, everything's very, very privatized, very individualized. And there's a lot of benefits to that in your own playlist, and you can sort of curate. But we also know that there are dangers to a hyper individualized, curated existence. I was just reading a book about the migration in American culture from the front stoop to the back patio, how in, most major metropolitan areas, the common sort of routine of the day is you'd come home, drop the briefcase off, and people would sit on their front stoops, their front porches, and actually converse with each other. And we slowly migrated to the backyard, put up taller and taller fences where we used to share lawnmowers as a community. Now we all got our own lawnmower and our own grill and our own patio set. And
we don't need each other
into our
as
garage.
much.
Right. We don't need each other. We've isolated ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think technology there's so much potential there, but I do sometimes wonder if we are mistaking connectivity with community. Like, they're not the same thing. You can be connected a million times over and not really have the communitas that Jesus talks about. I mean, there are 59 one another's in the New Testament.
No way.
It is hard to imagine doing half of them from behind a screen. Like, some of them just require a physicality. Like, there's a movement component to it with our bodies. And if we try to outsource all of that to a purely digital experience, but on the other end, though, and we get stories all the time of people who are like, I haven't been able to leave my house in 2 years. Thank you so much for providing. Your church has ministered to us because I physically can't leave, or, X amount of reasons. So it's certainly serving a purpose. It's just the kind of thing that I always want to make sure that as a church, we're being strategic of, and not just, simply letting it form us without being mindful of it,
Yeah. I definitely think there's a good way to use it. I don't know if I want to say the right and wrong way to use it, but it is a tool that we have to steward well. I mean, more people are going to see your internet content during the week than we'll see you in person on a Sunday. Same for me. Same for most pastors, I would say.
Totally. And that's I think that's a perfect, to call it a tool. I think it's like, if you had like a shovel, you can use a shovel to dig wells in Africa, or to bash people over the head with, right? But do either of those long enough, and you're going to get calluses on your fingers. Like, whether you're doing good with it or bad with it, it's still going to form you. Like, it's still doing something to you. So some people are going to use it well, some people won't, but either way, there's a formation that's happening. And I think we would do well to help educate people. What does it look like to be an apprentice to Jesus with all of these opportunities and all of this data and all of these things screaming for our attention? And, how do we do it strategically? Because, and I'm not proud to admit this, but I will, why not? Like, things like likes on Instagram, that can really seep into your psyche. You're like, well, yesterday's post got X amount of likes, this one only got this. Oh, I'm losing it as a writer, or I didn't hit the right tone, or I'm a failure. I could go to a really dark place.
Yeah.
You can have some of that on a Sunday, but to have like empirical, comparisons,
numbers
one day to the next, it can be helpful when utilized well, and can be crushing if you're not careful and you're not healthy,
Yeah. And I know we've talked mostly about social media here, but you also hosted a radio show for a few years. Is there anything that you learned there that you could take away from that experience that you can apply, or people can apply now?
Gosh. I need to listen more. That's for sure. That became very, very clear. I think when you're preaching once a week, it's easy to think that you just have like unlimited things to talk about. And when you have a 5-day-a-week radio show and you realize like, I'm done talking about this topic. I don't have enough information, or I'm not an expert. So I remember getting really convicted too. Like, I need to stop saying things like, I read this study. No, you didn't. You read a summary of a study on Huffington Post. Like, don't, you know what I mean? Like, it was, but it gave me
like, I did this research on Twitter.
Right. For 4.5 minutes. Right. And so I just made it about, how can I bring in people that I think are really interesting or fascinating, or just doing it better. And I just I felt like it reignited just my general curiosity. I think being curious is such an underrated skill. I think being curious, more than just like how we describe curiosity in kids. Like, my kids are, 4, 3, and 1 month. I love watching their curiosity with nature and with bugs and with animals. Like, it's beautiful. But I also think curiosity is helpful, like in a disagreement. Like, if we get in an argument, if rather than like me just assuming I know you're into the story or trying to win, if I got curious about your life, I feel like we would have much better dialogue. And I learned that over the course of 2 years on this radio show. Like, if you're actually curious, interested in people, it's amazing what not only you can learn, but like how that can change the way you see the world and yourself. And I don't know, I was really grateful for that time, because it gave me an opportunity to even see, how I'm sure you have some of this with your show. Like, sometimes you're like working stuff out as you're saying it. And sometimes, when you finish a sentence, you're like, oh, I wasn't quite sure that I feel that way, but now that I said it, it was just an opportunity for us to process stuff. It was me and another pastor, which of course was a blast, because we get to talk about the thing that we love doing. Yeah. And it was just it was a lot. I bet. That was a lot of pressure, a lot of content, but it was a wonderful experience.
That's so cool. Yeah. I think the lie with curiosity is, if we're curious about somebody else's viewpoint, then we're going to change our mind, or they're going to change our mind. I think that's the fear, is the lie of like, if you ask questions, they're going to like do some voodoo magic on you. And all of a sudden you're going to lose your stance and take theirs. I don't think that's actually how it works.
I don't think so either.
I think it just develops compassion within us, and it helps us to see people the way Jesus sees people.
Which that's the hope, I think.
Right.
I think you're, there was what is it called? There was a study done a couple years ago. It was called the Perception Gap Study. It was done by a company called More in Common. Okay. And it was fascinating. It polled people on the far right and the far left about like hot button issues in culture, whether that is gun control or immigration or whatever. Sure. And it was so fascinating to see. They would ask, what percentage of the opposing party do you think cares about this? And they would give their answer both ways. And what they found was both sides were terrible at assessing what the other side actually felt about something. But we have this sort of, like, whenever I see outrage just unfurling online, I always think, who stands to benefit the most from this outrage? Yeah. Like, it's there, if the social dilemma had any sense of truth in it, like there is a strategy behind getting us to be at each other's throats. Right. And to fight against that is exactly that. It's a fight. I don't think we will naturally drift towards compassion, curiosity. Right. I think it requires work. I think Jesus tells us it's a sanctification journey. And this assumption that I'm going to like veer towards kindness naturally is, at least in my life, you're probably a much holier person than I am, but I
guarantee you I'm not.
I haven't found myself just waking up like, I'm like more disciplined and gracious and forgiving and kind.
Just through osmosis, the Holy Spirit.
Without even trying. Yeah. I just slept on Galatians. That's all I did. It was perfect.
Well, and what those studies show me, because my brain is not super analytical, but what I take away from things like that is the extremes are the same. They're so the same. And those are the people who think, the outliers are the very one way or the other, that think they're so different from the other side. And I'm like, you're exactly the same. You have the exact same mindset. You are doing the exact same behaviors. You are making the exact same judgments.
Yep.
just the opposite. Like,
That's right.
it blows my mind that people can't see that.
They call it horseshoe theory.
Oh yeah.
You're so far opposed to you're like next to each other.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Look, I'm like, just turn your head. They're right there.
It's fundamentalism just with a different title. Yeah. 100%.
Ian, I have one last question for you. This has been so fun. The podcast is called Becoming Church because the whole idea is that Jesus called us to become the church out in the world. What do you think people can do, whether it's social media or otherwise, to become the church today?
Gosh, that is a great question. This might be just where my head is at because I'm like fully immersed in sleep deprivation season. But I think most Christ followers will agree in the great commandment, right? Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. What I found to be true, and this is maybe really elementary, this is the one sentence to an 8-year-old moment. Like, yes. Is anyone their most loving self when they're exhausted? I'm not. I'm never the best version of myself when I'm run ragged, when I haven't, and I'm not even just talking like sleep. Like, I think this ties in everything we've talked about, whether it's tech or church or relationships. We are a hurry hustle culture.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so fascinating that workaholics get applause, alcoholics get treatment, but workaholics get celebrated. Like, there's just so much, it's so hard to fight against the temptation to do more or say more or achieve more or
be
produce more,
right.
Be more, all of it. Right. And what I love about like Ephesians, Romans, part of what the gospel is like, practice your position, right? This is already true of you in Christ Jesus. So like, live that out rather than do all of these things to try to like earn God's favor or affection. It's a completely different mindset. If we work from a place of rest rather than rest from work, that tends to be how we approach it, right? Like, work, collapse one day a week and then do it all over again.
Right.
Adam and Eve's first full day was not a day of accomplishment. It was a day of rest. Like, we minister and work and love and serve from a place of rest. And I think if we could get that right, I just think that would drastically change our relationships, the way we talk to each other, the way we see each other. It would make us more curious. It would make us better stewards of what we have. It would help us realize, like, the phone is a tool, but sometimes it's sucking life from us.
Right.
And I can turn it off and just be.
Yeah.
So I that feels like a cop-out answer, but I really do think reclaiming rest, Sabbath rhythms would be, I don't know. In my life, it's been a game-changing pursuit, and I'm far from there, but it's I'm committed to keep heading that direction.
That's awesome. No, I think it's great. And really, it starts, at least for me, in the mind. Like, I had to first, and I am not good at rest. So please hear me. I am not, we both said Enneagram 3. So I believe you, I know. But where I even started to be able to make work boundaries or be more present with my family and my kids when I'm home is I had to really, and it took far more years than it should have, but I had to really grasp the concept and the truth that God actually likes me.
Yes.
Like, not only does he love me, but he likes me, and he made me the way I am on purpose. And he likes that I can do things, but that's not why he likes me, you know? And it was that whole, if I do nothing else ever, he's not going to be like disappointed.
That's right.
And he's not going to be more proud of me tomorrow if I ignore my family to go like do more church stuff.
That's right. For
me, it all started in my mind. Yeah.
That's so good. I think the phrase for me that I kept thinking about when you were talking was, we don't work for God's affection, we work from it. Like, it's not something that we can earn and like finally he'll pay attention to us. It's like a place of like fully being known, fully seen. Yep. God knows you the most and loves you the most. That's a miracle. Like that.
Right.
All the icky, yucky parts. He's like, yep, I know you the deepest and I love you the most. So nothing you can do about that.
Yep, exactly.
That's a gift.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Ian, this has been so great. I've loved chatting with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Likewise.
Where can people follow you? I mean, obviously I'll link up your Instagram in the show notes.
Yeah, please do. I don't know that I can in good conscience recommend that you follow me. Follow me at your own risk, I guess.
I will.
If you'd like. It's just at Ian Simkins, IANSIMKINS. And I think that's everywhere. Are people still on Facebook? Is that still a thing?
I don't know. I try not to be, but I think it still is.
That's smart. I don't blame you there.
Awesome. Ian. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy. Appreciate it.
Wasn't he so fun? That was such a fun conversation. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Listen, make sure you're following Ian, follow all of the guests. But if there is a particular episode that you are loving, we would love if you would share it with somebody else. You can share it on social media and tag us. We would love to restory it. If you have ideas, if you have people that you want to hear from, send us a DM, let us know, leave those 5-star reviews, and we will see you next time.